Yeah. So the biggest thing with imposter syndrome is making sure that you check yourself. At least for me. So the first thing that I would say is find a friend, a mentor, a person that you trust that can really just double check your assumptions about yourself as to whether or not you're smart enough or funny enough or talented enough or whatever. The stories that we have in our head can be complete liars. So make sure that you have a trusted person that you can talk to around that.
I love that. So picking up on that, what I'm hearing is figure out the objective criteria of the role and go and get other opinions to validate your skill set relative to that and what you need to do to close the gaps. The other thing that I would offer is it is a thing. It's a real thing. It's scientifically proven. There's lots of books about it. I think the most famous one is the Cinderella complex. And so you can certainly read about it. And this is common not just for us women, but also for men. So it's not unique to our gender or to our situation. I'm sorry that that's happened to you. And this is what comes up for me. I would get out. I would go and get another role somewhere else because, to your point exactly, if that false perception is there and you've now realized it, it's going to be very difficult to change those minds because they've built up a story around it. And so unless you love the culture that you're in and you really want to fight for it, in which case I'd give you a different answer. So in the case that you're okay to move on, take all that great experience and that learning and apply it somewhere else and find a great culture that'll fit you and allow you to grow. And if you really, really want to stay in that place, you're essentially going to need a new language for advocating for yourself and learning how to brag.
Love that.
Yeah.
Originally when I heard the question, my first thought was not letting it get to that point and really being an advocate for yourself in your career. So don't wait for your performance reviews to know what's happening. Start to ask for those one-on-ones so that you're having regular feedback loops with the people that you report to and even peers that you work with. And also making sure that you are maybe looking around and seeing who are people that I can grab onto and get help with, find peers that you can work with, that you can go for tea and coffee and other things that we won't say in this interview, but just mainly ways to build relationships with people so that you have that rapport. So hopefully that if something like this was to happen, you would have a few people that can call it out, and then at least you're aware of what's happening. Yeah,
the other thing that comes up for me as you say that is to build your portfolio of wins, right? So, you know, what are you proud of? What testimonials almost can you get from your peers? So start to build that portfolio for yourself so that you can, you know, when you're advocating for yourself, either in that company or outside, you've got good evidence.
And get a good coach.
Yes, don't let this happen again.
The first part of this, I think, is making sure that you're calling out people when the little things are happening. So if somebody makes an inappropriate joke, call them out on it. It's not just water cooler talk or it all happens in the locker room. Know the things that you stand for. We talked a little bit about this before, about your values, knowing where your boundaries are, and advocating for those groups that you want to advocate for. I was just having a conversation with someone talking about how we're all learning. So everybody is becoming woke at different times. Allowing for that, because some people really don't know, but making sure that the things that are really wrong, that you're calling those things out.
I love that, and I love the little things like language. You know, one of my favorite expressions that I would hear all the time is the thing has legs. Like it's got opportunity, it's got potential. And I'm like, I use this phrase. And so I was actively myself trying to figure out what's another way to say the same thing so that so notice it yourself. The other thing that I would offer is this is where you want some of your male allies. If this is happening, I would go to them and say, hey, look, I've said something, can you also say something? Because they hear it differently. And maybe they really aren't aware that, you know, saying this thing or doing this thing is wrong or is crossing a boundary. And so another man saying that to that guy can help. would surround myself with good friends and colleagues that I can talk to through the stuff, or HR. Maybe if you have a good HR person, you know, I don't know if you have a good HR person. I would also get a coach in that kind of case to build my language, my way of speaking out those boundaries or those transgressions. And I would also figure out what my values are and my boundaries are, so I know which battles I want to pick. Because it can be exhausting. Like a woman showed up in my coaching practice after this event, and she's had a terrible experience. And it was like over years that this male boss that she had basically took advantage of the power relationship and said all kinds of inappropriate things. And then one day the straw, you know, broke the camel's back and she left. And so we all have these experiences where, like, if I look back on my career, I mean, there are so many times I could have said something and I didn't, because I was just like, well, whatever, he's Italian. No offense to any Italian friends or colleagues or anything. The guy happened to be Italian. So, like, you know, like, that's what I thought about it. I didn't think anything much of it. It's a different cultural context, whatever. But in hindsight, I'm like, well, maybe it would be helpful to him to understand in Canada, that kind of stuff doesn't fly. And so if you're going to do it to me, I don't know if you're going to do it to a client or to one of your peers, but that's going to be a different scenario in terms of their reaction. And that might have been helpful for him. But anyway, that's what comes up for me.
Yeah, I would also say knowing yourself. So we talked a lot in the talk about knowing when you're feeling those things, that it's too much, or, you know, notice when you're getting really upset or you want to blow up or whatever, and know what you have to do in those situations to make sure you're taking care of yourself. So do you need to remove yourself? Do you need to set up a meeting so that you can actually talk it down? Do you need to write it down so that you have all your thoughts together? We have a really helpful feedback model that if you would be interested in, we'd love to share that with you, where it's just knowing what you want to say and making sure that you're taking the emotion out of it. So we're talking about facts, and so that you're not attacking people personally. You're really just saying what it is that was offensive.
Well said.
Thank you. So the first thing that I want to say is check your bias on this one, really, because there are cultures that I think in our mind in North America that we automatically assume have these really bad principles, I guess, about how they treat women. But it's not necessarily that everyone internalizes that, so just check your bias before you assume that first. That being said, I think that it relates to a lot of what we said, which is make sure that you're talking to people on the facts more than, you know, you come from this country and I know that you're like really bad towards women, so I'm really not taking this now, this behavior.
I'm sure you're not going to say that.
No.
Hopefully not.
No. But just making sure that you're checking about the judgment around what that person is saying based on where they're from, other than was it actually something that offended somebody in the room, offended you.
And I would add, we do leadership training around bias. It's one of our core foundations in the beginning of the leadership development work that we do, because we want everyone to understand what are your, not just cultural biases, but personal biases around who you hire, who you put around you. Do you like extroverts or introverts? You know, like we're all sitting in them. And the more that we can sort of put ourselves in the observatory or the gallery looking at ourselves in our lives, the easier it's going to be for us to understand, what is my bias here? I'm curious. Why do I get triggered in this particular situation? What is it about it? Is it a values thing? Is it a judgment that I'm sitting in? Like, what's going on? And this can happen everywhere. I realized this the other day myself about a judgment I had about my husband and a particular reaction he has to certain situations that always triggers me, and I was like mad at him for it. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, I'm sitting in judgment about him, which completely shifted my perspective about the whole thing.
So when I hear this question, my first thought is that there's not enough of people to take on things. Like, that was my first. So the people saying there's not enough women to take on these roles. That was my first thought. I mean, I could be taking the question completely wrongly. When I hear that, I'm just thinking that's a stupid excuse and you need to work harder. So what comes up for me is advocate. what are you advocating for? Who can you bring in? Who can you say, you know what, you really should hire this person, and not wait for people to be asking, oh, I'm looking for a job, that type of thing. Really try to find the gaps in your organization, and if you know that those are things that need to be filled and you know people to fill them, start advocating for that.
That's interesting. I took this question much more personally, and I took it as like, I was thinking of myself as inadequate. So I don't know, I wish you were here that we could have this conversation, and you can call us. We're happy to talk to you. But I took it that way, and I just felt just really that sort of pain of feeling like I'm not good enough, or I'm not getting where I want to be, and that struggle. And I just wanted you to be gentle with yourself and, you know, get what you need, and, you know, maybe put yourself in some pajamas and watch some movies and take, you know, that's what I would do if I was taking care of myself and wanted a break, you know, and then come back to the problem and see what really the root is underneath it. So I took this question as really understanding what is leverage in a business context. So I was really curious about why you need leverage and when you want to use leverage. So leverage for me is really about the power dynamic in between relationships, most easily I can think of that in terms of like, if you're selling services to a customer and they're buying from you, there's a point where that customer has leverage, and there's a point where you as the service provider have leverage. And so it's a moving, fluid thing. And what you really want to understand is, what are your table stakes around whatever this thing is that you want to have leverage over? And one of my favorite lessons in university business school was BATNA, a better alternative to a negotiated agreement. So what am I going to walk away? Like when will I walk away? What are my boundaries around where that leverage is, and when I'm going to say, just screw it, I'm not doing this anymore, or I really need this thing to work, or this, whatever. That's how I thought.
I totally second all that. But I would also say not to come at things from a malicious place.
Hopefully
leverage can be used because you need something, but not because you're trying to get back at people. So I would just question your motives around why you need the leverage.
Fair point. So the rules in Canada, as far as I understand, is when you get to 50 people, that's when you actually need HR, like there's a legal limit. Until that point, they can do whatever they want. But essentially, I would advocate for the policies that you're looking for, and I would advocate your position from the perspective of the business. So I would say, like, for example, we have a client where they have a very small percentage of women, but their client base is 50% women. Like, the people that buy their services are 50% women. And so we simply kind of just asked that question and pointed it out and then said nothing. That was enough to have them go, shit, right, wonder about that. What are we gonna do?